By 8:45, the suitcase by my front door had started to feel like a stranger. Its leather corners gleamed in the morning light, a silent witness to promises I'd been foolish enough to believe. The tea I'd poured sat cooling on the windowsill, untouched. Steam fading the way people's intentions do when you're no longer at the center of their plans. They'd said 9 o'clock sharp. I'd heard my son's voice in my head all morning, cheerful, certain. "We'll swing by on the way out. Don't worry about a thing, Mom." So I didn't worry, not at first. I stood by the window, hat in hand, watching every car that slowed near the curb. The street was unusually alive. A silver sedan, a red pickup, the mail truck. Each one passing felt like a small betrayal I was expected to swallow without flinching. The pail and shovel for the grandchildren sat in a paper bag by the door, bright red plastic catching the sun. I'd imagined their little hands digging into the wet sand, their laughter carrying on the wind. I'd imagined me there kneeling beside them. But at 9:07, a tiny fissure formed in that picture. By 9:19, it spread. And still, I waited. Not because I believed they were coming, but because leaving the window would make the truth arrive too soon. This drops the viewer directly into the moment of betrayal, using the cooling tea, the suitcase, and the red pail as quiet but powerful symbols. It sets up the emotional weight without giving away resolution, keeping the tension taut for the next section. At 8:59, my phone buzzed once, just a single vibration that sent a quick rush of relief through me. But it wasn't them. It was the pharmacy, reminding me to refill my prescription before the end of the week. I set it face down on the sill, the way you might close a book you didn't want to finish and kept watching the street. Through the sheer curtains, I saw my neighbor, Mr. Alford, shuffling to his mailbox in his robe. He raised a hand toward my window, a friendly wave, but when he caught sight of the suitcase, his face shifted to polite confusion. He didn't ask. He went back inside. At 9:10, I thought I heard a car slow. I stepped back from the glass, just enough so they wouldn't see me waiting like a child at a sleepover pickup, and smoothed the front of my blouse. But the sound faded, leaving only the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the wall clock. By 9:20, I'd perched on the arm of the sofa, still angled toward the front of the house. My hat sat in my lap, the ribbon catching between my fingers as I twisted it slowly. I don't even remember picking it up. That was when I noticed the grocery bag on the floor near my feet, the one I'd packed with road snacks. Little things I thought would make the trip easier for them. Paper napkins folded into halves, bottled water, crackers without crumbs, a thermos of coffee that would still be warm by mid-morning. I'd pictured handing it over as they pulled up, my son leaning out the window to say, "Perfect, Mom. You always think of everything." Instead, the bag just sat there, handles leaning in toward each other like it already knew it wasn't going anywhere. At 9:32, I gave in and called. Once, twice, straight to voicemail. By 9:40, I told myself the traffic on the interstate must be terrible, and maybe they'd stop for gas. That was when the kettle clicked off in the kitchen. I poured a cup of tea without really tasting it, standing at the counter because sitting felt too much like surrender. The steam curled up into my face and then drifted away, just like it had from the cup in the window. When I carried it back toward the living room, my eyes caught on the small note I'd left by the door. Keys in purse, sunscreen packed. I'd written it last night, thinking it would help me remember not to fuss in the morning. Now it looked almost like a reminder for someone else entirely. I set the tea on the sill again, still hot enough to fog the glass, and resumed my post by the window. Out on the street, a delivery truck rumbled past without slowing. The driver glanced at my house, then down at a clipboard. Inside, the clock ticked again, louder this time. I could almost hear my son's voice from earlier in the week, casual as anything. "Don't worry about a thing, Mom. We'll swim by. We'll get you there." And I realized, standing there with my shoes still pinching slightly from being new, that the first thing they'd given me on this trip was time to wait. A lot of it. By noon, the tea on the windowsill had gone cold, a thin skin forming across the top. I didn't pour it out. I just left it there the way I sometimes leave the porch light on after midnight, knowing no one's coming, but unwilling to turn the switch. I moved through the kitchen without thinking, wiping the already clean counter, folding the dish towel along its worn crease. The grocery bag still sat by the door. I'd stepped around it so many times that morning I'd begun to walk with a slight curve, as though I'd rearranged myself to make room for something no one else would take. Lunch should have been something light. I'd planned on stopping for seafood with them along the coast, but instead I reheated a bowl of yesterday's soup. It tasted flat. I sprinkled in pepper, stirred twice, and ate standing up. When the spoon clinked against the side of the bowl, it sounded too loud in the room. After washing the dish, I checked my phone again. Still nothing. No missed calls, no new messages. My son's photo in the contacts list, him at 16, grinning with his first car, felt like it belonged to someone else's life. I wandered into the living room, meaning to dust the mantel, but stopped short when I caught sight of my reflection in the darkened television screen. Hat still in hand, coat draped over one arm, shoes on, ready to leave. It was almost funny, if you ignored the part where it wasn't. I sat on the edge of the sofa and thought about the last time I'd been included without asking. The image that came wasn't a holiday or a trip, but a Tuesday evening years ago when my son had shown up unannounced with the kids for dinner. I'd made spaghetti that night, nothing special. But they'd stayed, laughed, left the table messy. I'd washed the dishes with a warm sort of tiredness. That was the last time I remembered feeling needed without being reminded to be grateful for it. The grocery bag caught my eye again. Bright red pail and shovel peeking over the top like they were trying to see out the window themselves. I imagined the children's hands wrapped around them, the sand sifting through, the sunlight on their hair. I had pictured myself in that frame, bending down to help, keeping them shaded, making sure no wave caught them unsteady. Now the plastic gleam of the bucket felt out of place, too cheerful for the stillness of the house. At 2:45, I tried calling again, straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I couldn't think of what to say that didn't sound like a question I didn't want answered. So I went upstairs instead, opened my dresser drawers, and began returning the clothes I'd folded so carefully the night before. The navy slacks, the soft blue cardigan, the sandals with the good straps for walking on boardwalks. One by one, they went back into their spots. The bag by the door stayed untouched, though. I couldn't quite bring myself to unpack that yet. The house had the smell of fabric softener and lemon cleaner. The smells of preparation, not of living. I ran my hand over the arm of the sofa, remembering when the fabric was new, when my husband used to drop his newspaper onto the cushion beside him, saying, "What's for dinner?" as if the answer would always be waiting. Now, I could barely remember the last time anyone had asked. By 3 o'clock, I finally slipped off my shoes. My toes ached from the waiting. I set them neatly by the door, pointed toward the wall instead of out. It felt like a small, private signal. No one is coming. And still the red bucket leaned out of the grocery bag as if it hadn't heard. I sat on the sofa, my feet bare now, the afternoon light slipping across the rug in long, slow bands. The red bucket still leaned in the grocery bag by the door, as if it were trying to catch my attention. It pulled me backward. Not to last summer, not even to when the children were little, but all the way to a beach 35 years ago, when my son was no taller than my hip and the world seemed to open just for us. We'd driven down in our old station wagon, the one with the faded wood paneling and the temperamental radio that only caught the local station if you angled the dial just so. The air smelled of salt and sunscreen the moment we rolled down the windows. He was in the back seat, swinging his legs, holding his own red bucket, smaller than the one I'd bought for his children, clutched to his chest like treasure. He had been quiet for most of the drive, watching the sky until we crested the hill and the ocean came into view. Then he'd gasped, just once, as if the sight had taken the wind right out of him. "It's so big," he'd whispered, his little hand gripping mine as soon as we parked. We walked down the warm wooden steps to the sand, the boards clicking under our sandals. I remember the heat rising from the shore, the sound of waves breaking in a slow, steady rhythm. He ran ahead a few feet, then turned back, calling for me. His face split into a grin so wide it left no room for doubt. I was his anchor, his safe point in all that space. We built a crooked castle that day, one tower leaning so much I had to prop it with an extra wall. He filled the moat with water, running back and forth with that bucket, never once complaining that it spilled before he reached me. When the sun dipped low, we sat together on the damp sand, his hair sticking to his forehead, his hand still in mine. I can still feel the faint grit of sand between our fingers, the way he leaned into me as if the day had been too good to let go of yet. The drive home had been quiet, not the tense silence I know now, but the heavy-lidded calm of contentment. He'd fallen asleep before we hit the highway, the red bucket rolling gently in the back seat with the tide of each turn. It wasn't a grand trip, no resorts, no photos in frames. But when I think of what it means to be central to someone's life, I think of that day. His small voice calling my name over the wind, the way he'd glance up to be sure I was watching. The light in my living room shifted, pulling me back to the present. The bucket by the door looked brighter now, as if it knew it was part of a story no one else remembered. I reached over and straightened his handle, the plastic smooth and unfamiliar under my hand. The one from that summer was long gone, cracked and faded after years of play. But, holding this new one, for a moment I could almost hear his voice again. Not the clipped tones from our last conversation, but the breathless boy at the water's edge who never would have dreamed of leaving me behind. By late afternoon, the sunlight had softened, filtering through the curtains in a pale wash. The house felt smaller somehow, the walls closer though nothing had moved. I'd unpacked most of my clothes, returned my sandals to their box, but I left the grocery bag by the door. It was the only thing that still looked like I might be going somewhere. At 5:12, my phone buzzed. The sound startled me. I'd stopped expecting it. My hand moved faster than it should have, a flicker of something warm rising in my chest before I even saw the screen. It wasn't my son. It was the bank, sending a balance alert. Still, I held the phone a moment longer, as though another message might follow. The red bubble over the messages icon stayed stubbornly at 0. I set the phone on the arm of the sofa, screen down, and turned toward the window. A car slowed as it approached the corner. Dark blue, the kind of shade I thought I recognized. I leaned forward just slightly, enough to catch the angle of the headlights. It wasn't them. The car turned, disappearing behind the hedges across the street. For a moment, I stayed leaned forward anyway, my hand resting on the windowsill beside the cold cup of tea. The handle of the red bucket caught the light from the lamp, glinting like it was trying to catch my eye. I stood and walked to the door. My fingers brushed the pale smooth rim before I reached for my coat on the hook. I didn't put it on. I just held it for a while, feeling the weight of it in my arms, the way I used to hold a purse when I knew I'd be heading out any minute. The coat smelled faintly of cedar from the closet, a scent that always made me think of winter holidays, of doors opening, of people stepping in from the cold with flushed cheeks. That memory alone was enough to bring the smallest swell of hope to my chest. Maybe they'd had car trouble. Maybe there'd been a last-minute delay, a mix-up about the time. Maybe the sound of a television laugh track carried faintly from the neighbor's house. The light outside shifted, and I caught my reflection in the glass. Still standing there, coat in hand, shoes off, hair flattened from the day. It was such a small thing, that realization. There are no maybes left when the sun has already started to set. I hung the coat back on the hook. The fabric fell silent against the wall. By 6, the street lights flickered on. I didn't turn on the overhead light in the living room. The dimness made it easier to let go of the day's shape, as if darkness could smooth out the edges of what had happened. The red bucket still sat by the door, but its color looked muted now, dulled in the absence of sun. I passed it without touching it. By the time the sun had slipped away entirely, the house was more shadow than shape. I hadn't turned on a single light. There was no need. Darkness can be honest in ways daylight refuses. I sat at the kitchen table without meaning to. One moment I was pacing from the window to the door. The next, I was just there, my hands resting on the cool wood. The silence pressed in, not sharp like a sudden sound, but heavy, like the weight of a blanket you didn't ask for. The grocery bag still leaned where I'd left it. From here, I could just see the rim of the red bucket above the paper edge. In the dimness, it looked almost gray, like it had absorbed the day's disappointment and lost the will to be bright. My eyes kept drifting to it. It was ridiculous. How an object could feel heavier than its plastic should allow. I had bought it thinking it would carry sand and laughter. Instead, it sat full of everything I hadn't said. The fatigue wasn't just in my body, though that was there too. A dull ache in my lower back, the stiffness in my fingers. It was in my thoughts, slowed and thick, like wading through water with clothes still on. There's a point when waiting becomes something else entirely. It's not hope anymore, but a kind of suspension, a hovering in place while the rest of the world moves on without you. I realized I hadn't eaten dinner. I didn't feel hungry, just hollow in a way food wouldn't touch. My tea still sat on the windowsill in the other room. I thought about pouring it out, but couldn't summon the will to stand. I looked at my phone once more, not expecting anything, just confirming the emptiness. The screen lit my face briefly, and in the reflection, I barely recognized myself. Hair flattened, eyes tired, mouth set in the kind of line you get when you've been holding it together too long. Once, when I was much younger, I remember staying up late with my father while the rest of the house slept. He'd been mending something, a fishing net, maybe, and I'd been sitting beside him, drowsy but unwilling to go to bed. He told me then that it's not storms that wear you down, but the still windless days that stretch without end. I think I understand that now. My stillness tonight wasn't peace. It was the absence of anyone to move her. Finally, I rose and walked to the door. I picked up the grocery bag, intending to put it away. But when I lifted it, the red bucket tilted toward me, catching just enough lamplight from the street outside to look almost alive again. My grip faltered. Instead of carrying it upstairs, I set it back down. Not because I wanted it there, but because I didn't know where else it belonged. Neither did I. The phone rang just after 9. Not the sharp, impatient tone of a call that needs you. The slow, steady chime of someone who assumes you'll answer. I stared at it until it went quiet again. When the voicemail alert flashed, I didn't rush to hear it. I just sat there at the kitchen table, letting the silence after the ring settle into my bones. It was almost a relief, realizing I could choose not to fill it. The grocery bag was still by the door. I could make out the red bucket now, faintly lit by the spill of the street lamp through the curtain. All day it had been a reminder of what wasn't happening. Tonight it looked different. Not brighter exactly, but more solid, like it had weight of its own. I thought about that day on the beach with my son, his small hands clutching his own bucket, the way he'd kept glancing back to make sure I was there. Somewhere along the years, I had stopped being the person anyone checked for. I ran my fingertips along the table's edge. The varnish worn smooth in places. You can keep waiting, I told myself, or you can decide something else. The words weren't loud. They didn't arrive with any grand swell of music, just as a calm statement that seemed to fit in the quiet. I stood, slowly, feeling the stiffness in my knees. Crossing the room, I picked up the grocery bag. The plastic handle of the bucket was cool under my palm. I held it, not looking away this time. I didn't put it back down. Instead, I walked it to the hall closet. The door hinges gave their small, familiar sigh. I moved an old stack of board games aside, slid the bucket to the back, and closed the door with a quiet click. It wasn't anger that made me do it. It wasn't surrender either. It was the first tiny refusal, to leave something in place just because that's where it had always been. The phone lit up again, a new message waiting. I didn't reach for it. Not yet. I turned off the kitchen light, leaving the room in darkness, and for the first time all day, it didn't feel like the house was closing in. The next morning broke pale and still, the kind of light that makes the edges of everything softer. I moved through the house without rushing, brewing a single cup of coffee, not tea, and drinking it at the table without checking my phone once. When I finished, I went to the hall closet and opened the door. The red bucket sat where I'd left it, tucked behind the board games. I reached for it, feeling the cool plastic curve against my palm. It was lighter than I'd expected. I held it in both hands for a moment, the way you might carry a gift you aren't sure you're ready to give. Then I took it to the sink and rinsed off the faint dust from its handle. The sound of the water was sharp in the quiet kitchen, steady and certain. By mid-morning, I had my coat on and a scarf wrapped loosely around my neck. I didn't leave a note on the counter. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. The bucket swung gently from my hand as I stepped out into the crisp air. The small lake in town was only a 15-minute walk, the kind of place parents brought their children on weekends when they didn't want the hassle of a real trip. Today, the path was dotted with last night's leaves, the air carrying the faint scent of damp earth. When I reached the water, I stood for a moment, taking it in. The way the morning light bounced on the ripples, the calls of geese overhead, the laughter of a few children playing in the sand. One little girl, no more than 5, was crouched near the shoreline, patting at the wet sand with her hands. Her father sat on a bench a few yards away, keeping watch, a paper coffee cup warming his hands. I walked over slowly, and when she looked up, her eyes went straight to the bright red bucket in mine. I held it out. "Would you like this?" She glanced at her father. He nodded once, and she took it from me with both hands, a small smile tugging at her cheeks. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely louder than the lap of the water. "You're welcome," I replied, and I meant it. Her father called to her, "Stay where I can see you," and she nodded, already filling the bucket with sand. I watched for a moment, the plastic flashing red in the sunlight before I turned back toward the path. My hands felt strangely light without it. Not empty, just free. When I got home from the lake, the house was still as I'd left it. The scarf hung loosely around my neck, carrying the faint scent of the morning air, and my coat held a lingering trace of the bench I'd rested on before walking back. The spot by the door, where the grocery bag had sat all day yesterday, was empty now. Bare floorboards. No bright red curve peeking into the corner of my vision. I stood there for a while, letting the stillness settle around me. Not as something pressing in, but as space I could actually breathe in. On the side table, my phone blinked, a tiny, insistent light. I knew what it meant. A message I didn't need to read. An apology crafted more for the sender's comfort than mine. I picked it up, scrolled just far enough to see the first few words, and then set it back down, face first without replying. In the kitchen, I poured the cold tea from the windowsill into the sink. The surface broke in one clean ripple before swirling away, leaving nothing but the faintest ring in the bottom of the cup. I washed it, dried it, and slid it into the cupboard. The hall closet was still ajar from when I'd taken the bucket earlier. I opened it fully, scanning the shelves. There was a half-empty picnic basket there, the same one I used to pack when my son was young, when weekends meant sandwiches, blankets, and the red bucket bouncing in the back seat. I pulled it down, dusted the lid with my hand, and carried it to the kitchen. Inside, I placed a folded beach towel, a paperback I'd been meaning to read, and a thermos. No snacks for anyone else. No sunscreen for little hands. Just my things. I closed the lid, fastened the clasp, and slid the basket into the space by the door where the grocery bag had been. It wasn't going back into storage. It wasn't waiting for anyone's plans. It was ready when I was. I stood there for a moment longer, looking at it, the basket in the place where the bucket had been, and felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest. Not loud, not bitter, just done. The door stayed locked behind me as I walked away from it, not toward the window to watch for cars, but into the living room, where the evening light stretched across the floor, long and gold and mine to keep. The following morning came in slow and golden, the kind of light that slipped through the curtains like it already knew it was welcome. I woke without an alarm, without the familiar heaviness that had followed me from bed to kitchen for longer than I could remember. There was no suitcase by the door this time, no grocery bag waiting to be claimed, only the picnic basket, neatly fastened, sitting in the same spot as if it had always belonged there. I brewed coffee again, the rich scent curling into the corners of the kitchen, and drank it at the table without glancing at my phone. The silence felt different now, not empty but open. Through the window, I watched the street stir to life. The mail truck passed, a neighbor's dog trotted along the sidewalk tail high. There was no knot in my stomach this time when a car slowed in front of the house. Whoever they weren't coming for me. And that was fine. After breakfast, I opened the hall closet to take out my coat. The empty space where the red bucket had been caught my eye. I didn't feel that pinch in my chest anymore when I looked at it. Instead, it felt like a chapter finished. The bright, hollow thing gone, replaced with something that would carry what I wanted when I wanted it. I slipped on my coat, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and picked up the picnic basket. It was light but certain in my hand, the clasp clicking softly as I shifted my grip. There was no grand plan for the day, no itinerary, no coordinating with anyone else's schedule. I simply walked to the park at the edge of town. The air was cool but forgiving, the grass still damp from the morning dew. I chose a bench near the pond, set the basket beside me, and just sat. Children played on the far side, their voices carrying across the water. A few were digging in the sand near the small playground, their colorful toys scattered like tiny flags. One of them, a little girl in a yellow coat, had the red bucket. She was filling it with pine cones now, not sand, as if she decided it could be more than it was made for. I smiled at that. I poured coffee from my thermos, the steam rising in the crisp air, and let my eyes follow the ripples on the pond. There was no urge to be anywhere else. No waiting for someone else's permission to feel included. The sun inched higher, catching the water in flashes of light. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was looking out at life from behind a pane of glass, but as though I was sitting squarely inside it. I thought of my father's words about the still windless days, how they wear you down more than storms. He was right. But what he didn't say, what I had to learn for myself, is that you can choose to row even when the air is still. I took a slow sip of coffee, the warmth settling in my chest, and let the moment be enough. No chasing, no reaching. Just here. When I finally rose from the bench, the basket was lighter still, though I hadn't eaten a thing. I walked home at my own pace, the path ahead clear, the day mine. And when I closed the front door behind me, I didn't look toward the window to see if anyone might arrive. I already had